Hey everybody, the new FNAF game recently came out and I've been seeing a lot of different opinions about the game, which is fine. I've been having a great time with it, and in my opinion I think it's one of the best Five Nights at Freddy's games ever made. But along with a lot of these opinions and takes I've seen on the game, I've seen a lot of people misunderstand or misinterpret the story and lore of the game. So I'm here to go over everything in the game and what it has to offer in terms of the character, the lore, the story, and backstory behind this game. If at any point I accidentally say something that is incorrect, please let me know in the comments, but also be sure to tell me why I'm wrong with evidence so I can see exactly how I misunderstood something or see if I missed anything. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive right into the game. Let's start off with the main story, the story we play through in the game. The main story of this game has us play as a Fazbear worker named Arnold, who is a mess to say the least. He's been working for the past 36 straight hours and wants to go home and sleep when he suddenly gets a call from Fazbear Entertainment telling us that their contractor, Edwin Murray, has gone missing, and now we need to go to Edwin's Costume Manor to find and retrieve some of Fazbear's property, since they legally own it through some contracts and stuff. I'm putting emphasis on Edwin being a contractor because that'll be important to understand some of the lore revelations that we get later in this game. Once we arrive and find our way inside, we get into the security office where we begin to communicate with dispatch through an old intercom speaker telling us that we are specifically looking for a special endoskeleton that can mimic anything it wants to become, from its shape and size to its voice and personality. Now, Fazbear Entertainment admits that they lied about this, but it's also what was setting off all the motion detectors inside the building. As we continue through the game, we are constantly stalked and chased by the Mimic, who can hide in various mascot costumes through either scripted segments and boss fights, or randomly generated rooms, kind of like the Alien Isolation. Some of the characters we meet and chase are Jackie, the giant music man, whose name I forgot but I think is called Big Top Music Man, Dolly, who the Mimic actually steals and becomes before the big chase through the molten metal, and Chica, but it's a prototype version of her on roller skates from Chica's Party World. Remember, this is just a prototype for later, and we'll find out that during this part of the timeline, Chica's Party World was actually a thing since 1975, and she wasn't yet a member of the main Fazbear band, but seemed to be on her way to becoming one of those main members. After each boss fight, to put it that way, we get the ability to level up our data diver in order to access different parts of the building, and after getting the final level, the executive level, we go into the tunnels and find this Golden Freddy-like paranormal character who is based on the tiger plushie that David Murray owned. This character will stalk us, it will teleport around, and only hide in the dark. There are a lot of people who are actually confused about this character. Some people think that this is the Mimic, while other people think that this is possessed by the soul of David. But we can automatically rule out that Tiger is possessed by the Mimic, as it is a mascot suit that has paranormal tendencies and does not whatsoever match the other behavior that the Mimic has shown before or after this part of the game. After we get out of the tunnels, we go back to the office and are told by dispatch to give them the data diver. Now there are a few different things we can do here, and the first one is giving dispatch the data diver. This results in the bad ending, which I'm labeling as ending 1. In ending 1, after giving dispatch the data diver, we leave the building and begin driving home, where we are then met with the shocking revelation that dispatch has been trying to contact us all night, and that we are fired for going off schedule and losing our data diver. After being fired, we then adjust the mirror and see the Mimic in the backseat of our car, which we are then attacked, knocked unconscious, and dragged back to the Costume Manor. After waking up, we are met with the insane and unpredictable sight that we were stuffed inside of a prototype Freddy Fazbear suit, performing alongside prototype versions of Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate, with the Mimic watching us, similar to the ending of Help Wanted where Glitchtrap is dancing around while we're performing as Freddy Fazbear. Now, you might be confused, why are Freddy and friends down under the Costume Manor? What does the Mimic have to do with this? And why didn't we see any of this in the main game. Now, before we get to the other endings, I want to go over the Edwin, the Mimic, and Edwin's family in order to add some context and build up for the other endings. Starting off with Edwin, Edwin was a worker at the Costume Manor because it was originally owned by his father. Now, I've speculated that his father was the costume maker, while Edwin was a more mechanical inventor, as seen by the fact that some of the audio logs with him and Fiona have him talk about his inventions before he gains access and full ownership of the company. And we find out that Edwin's big breakout invention was his Cleanovac, and as supported by a reel, we can find out then the second ending that we will get to later, that Edwin always tried to chase that high. Since that initial success, Edwin began to try and invent anything he could to surpass that initial success, but he never could. Some of the inventions he made were the stay-up latte coffee machine and the changing coat rack, and some other inventions that are mentioned in text logs scattered throughout the game, but all of these was results in returns, recalls, or lawsuits that would drain the company of its resources and money. Edwin's father unfortunately dies, leaving Edwin the company in his will, and Edwin goes to Fiona about all of this stress that he doesn't think he can run the company as successfully as his father, whereas Fiona reassures him and tells him that with this newfound power, Edwin can now run the company any way he wants and do whatever he wants. So now with Edwin being the owner or CEO of the Costume Manor, he continued to make his inventions alongside selling the costumes, and while the costumes sold very well, like I said before, his inventions were what the issues had. Sometime later, Edwin was approached by Fazbear Entertainment and was asked to commission some projects for the company by a contract. See? Told you the contractor role would come into play soon enough. Edwin couldn't turn down the contract because there was so much profit to be made that he said the money from it would make everything go back to normal. Any debts or loans they had could be paid off, all the lawsuits could be paid out, and the company could effectively start from scratch with little to no worries about what has happened before. While we never see this contract, we can assume that the area we saw in the previous ending was what Edwin was told to come up with. A prototype area of a pizzeria containing new characters who weren't Fredbear or Spring Bonnie, who at this point had already existed for years at this point in the game. Fredbear's singing show was a thing since the 70s, of course. I bring this up because many people seem to think that Edwin made up the ideas, concepts, and suits for Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, and the Springlocks, and I want to say that isn't entirely true. While Edwin did create improved prototype suits for both characters, they were made using the updated versions of Springlocks that Edwin had refined. Henry and William still made the Springlocks that we hear about in all the Fazbear Entertainment tapes that, suffer from the water damage and faultiness of like moving around and getting too much moisture on them, because we also see in a text log, Edwin fixed the issues and waterproofed them so they wouldn't come loose anymore. The other suits in this prototype pizzeria were Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, who are prototypes, not the official designs. So what would happen is Henry and William gave the specifications and designs they wanted to Edwin, where Edwin would then create the suits to Henry and William's specifications, and they would either approve them or tell Edwin that they need to change certain ideas and aspects in order to make them to their complete vision. Now, the only character who breaks this rule is Chica, because when we discover Chica's party world, we find out that she was Fiona's creation from the concepts and all the way back to the finished designs, meaning the only animatronic that we have concrete evidence of Fazbear Entertainment not coming up with was Chica the Chicken. I know that there are more like the mediocre melodies and a few of the glam rocks such as Monty and Roxy, but their roles and designs are so wildly different that they're basically only similar in name and color scheming alone, as well as the animal they were based off with. These suits also have the word prototypes written on them. and are classified as such in the files of the games, so these weren't created by Edwin. They were... Let me put it this way. Imagine you have an idea for an OC that you want to draw, but you don't have the skills to draw. So you go to an artist and pay them to create the OC for you. And throughout the process, you're telling them that what they're doing looks good, or you want to add this, or take away this, or change this. And at the very end, you get your finished design. Now, while you came up with that initial idea, even though you still didn't make the full thing, it is your character. And that's what I feel like the role Edwin has as a contractor to Henry William was. You can also view it in the same way that Scott Cawthon hired Jim Henson's Creature Shop and told them to make the suits for the first movie. Now, while Jim Henson's Creature Shop did make the suits, they weren't the ones to come up with the ideas or concept of those characters, and they were only contracted to bring these characters to life. And that's the role I feel like Edwin had with Fazbear Entertainment to some extent, because later we find out that William and Henry completely changed their minds last minute on the designs, and ended up going with wanting Edwin to create new designs that Edwin said looked too creepy. And I'm assuming this is referencing the unwithered versions of the FNAF animatronics. As Ralph said in the week before, he also described the withered animatronics in a very similar way, as being creepy and unnerving. Now, we also know that Fiona was the concept artist for the Fazbear Gang, though, because when Edwin gets these alternate designs, these creepy designs, he talks about how they were so close to done and Fiona's design looked too perfect that he's not going to change a single thing about them. Getting back to the main story, though, with Edwin's story, everything seemed to be going well up until the last minute, where Fazbear Entertainment, more likely William Afton, kept sending in change requests for Edwin's design, causing him to run out of time and go over budget. But unknowingly, this was the plan. William Afton was behind all of this. In an attempt to acquire Murray's Costume Manor and creations, he drafted up a contract that would be so nearly impossible to fulfill, but so ludicrous in its reward, that Edwin would have no choice but to accept it. Through this contract, he was essentially forcing Edwin to burn all of his money and resources on a contract that would never give him the safety net he was hoping for. William Afton got Henry Emily on board with this plan, and the two of them had created this contract that was so big the failure would cost Edwin everything. It also didn't help that in some of the text logs and audio logs, it implies that Edwin and Henry were friends, even on a nickname basis. So Edwin had no reason to not trust this contract and think anything was amiss. As the contract was still underway, William began to contact Murray Co. employees in attempts to have them quit their jobs there and have them join Fazbear Entertainment, and also telling them to take as much of their work with them as they could, alongside the contact info of other employees William and Henry didn't have. As more and more employees left, more progress was also made on this contract. William and Henry would keep making things more difficult for Edwin by approving everything he and Fiona would come up with, only to then ask them to change everything once they were nearly done, basically making these versions of the animatronics useless. They would end up sending Edwin their own concept art, which I said would be called Creepy, referring to the Unwithereds, potentially with Edwin refusing to do so, saying that he wasn't going to change Fiona's designs either way. We can find these files in Edwin's office called Fazbear Alt Designs, which I think is the file that Henry sent over. After nearly everything had failed for Edwin, William makes Edwin another offer for him to come over and work as a lead engineer for Fazbear Entertainment. While he and Henry would buy up the land and have all legal ownership over anything Edwin had made for Fazbear Entertainment, he would promise that Edwin's family house would be left alone. Edwin, however, seeing through all their lies, never took the job, and it is assumed that this is the point where he would shut himself off inside of his manor and begin working on the mimic endoskeleton. And with that backstory of Edwin and his role with Fazbear Entertainment out of the way, let's move on to the second ending, which explains more about Fiona, David, and Edwin's family dynamic, as well as the Mimic. For ending 2, after refusing to give Dispatch the data diver, we end up going through this system of events where Dispatch threatens to stuff us into a suit like the other dead workers we have seen scattered throughout the game, and we begin the exit show in the starting area. After pressing the big red button, we descend down under the factory and have to pull a bunch of levers to escape Music Man. Once all that is done, we find ourselves in the prototype pizzeria where we face off against the Mimic, who's wearing a bunch of different parts and scrap that belong to Freddy and friends in a salvage type animatronic. In order to escape, we get into all the prototype Springlock suits, like Monty, this dog animatronic who's reminiscent of Sparky, Fredbear, and Spring Bonnie, and we position these suits in front of all the doors to drain the power, where we are then met with the Mimic program that was dispatched, now revealing to be the Fiona machine, who tells us we need to go to Edwin's house, upload the Mimic 2 schematics, and have Edwin repair the Mimic 2 to bring back David and make their family go back to normal. After we get to their house, we find out that the house is already being patrolled by the Mimic, and we need to find a 5-digit code to the door to Edwin's office. Through finding different reels, we not only get the code, but further backstory into Edwin, his family, and the Mimic. Fiona and Edwin were both workers at Murray's Costume Manor, and met when Edwin was asked to record her voice using his newest invention, the Mr. Helpful puppet. Through more interactions and meetings, they got to know each other, they fell in love, got married, and had a baby boy named David. While everything was going well in Edwin's personal life, his work life was miserable. As things got worse and worse for the company, he began to lock himself away and put almost all of his attention on his work, often neglecting his family. Think of Henry's character from the Silver Eyes trilogy. While they are not the same, the two characters had similar personalities and did similar things when presented with grief and loss and other hardships. Fiona was still a worker at Edwin's Costume Manor and would go away sometimes for work, and one of these times she was called away to help with an event referred to as Fall Fest. Unfortunately, at Fall Fest, something bad happens and it caused Fiona to lose her life, leaving Edwin to take care of the business and David alone. Now it's been speculated that Fall Fest was burned down, and that's supported by the Moon.exe minigame, where a statue of Fiona refers to her as being burnt, as well as the Help Wanted 2 carnival minigames that are also speculated to take place at Fall Fest. Edwin makes an audio log after the incident saying that she wasn't even supposed to be there, and he doesn't feel like he can handle David and the business all by himself. While Edwin is dealing with his grief, another recording tells us that one day he heard Fiona's voice down in the tunnels and goes down to investigate himself. Down there, he finds something that recorded her voice, but Edwin tells us that he thinks her spirit is somehow manipulating the device. This is where we get into the Mimic. After discovering this, Edwin begins to work on a body for this version of Fiona, which is the Mimic. It's basically to replicate Fiona's role and personality to take care of David so he can fully focus on work. The Mimic model is referred to as the M1 Mimic. From the technology Edwin used, this suit is able to fit inside of anything at once or take on the role of anything it chooses, hence its name. While adopting Fiona's personality and role, we find audio tapes in Edwin's house that the Mimic, as Fiona, was telling Edwin that he needs to keep this a secret, as no one else would be able to understand what he did or why he did this. Edwin introduces the M1 Mimic to David, which David replies, "That's scary." Edwin reassures David by telling us that go in any costume it wants to look friendlier, and that it's also a babysitter for David. It seems that the Mimic takes on the different personalities, being Fiona only when Edwin's around, but the Mimic when David or anyone else is around, as supported by that previous audio tape we can find in Edwin's house. The Mimic continues to be friends with and take care of David while Edwin works, but unfortunately something else bad happens. While playing, David loses his ball, runs outside where he is hit by a car. Edwin, now consumed even by more grief and the loss of both his wife and son, he creates the Mimic 2 program in an attempt to mimic and replace David. However, this doesn't go well and the M2 refuses to try and mimic David. Now, while we don't have an official answer for this, I want to throw out a theory and say that M1 was possibly possessed by Fiona, which is why it's able to mimic her so well. We have some evidence for this, as throughout the game, we are told by the dispatch voice, which is the mimic, what to do, but once we get to the security office, it is replaced by Fiona's voice, which is in the machine. Which leads me to two options. One, the Fiona machine is M1, or two, the Fiona was the M1 mimic, but the M1 program gave up the mimic endoskeleton so that Edwin could make the M2 program to put inside the mimic endoskeleton to be David. Instead, then the Fiona consciousness was then transferred into the F10 and 4 machine, which also says Fiona but with numbers. While making M2, Edwin realizes that what he's been doing has gone too far. He realizes that everything he has done won't actually bring back his family, and as the M2 begins to mimic David, Edwin begins to destroy it and screams that it isn't David and needs to stop being him. In this destruction, the mimic sustains heavy damage to its legs, and that's where it learns its violent tendencies and is also left in a state of disrepair for a long time by Edwin. Sometime in the future, while Edwin is working on something in his office, an explosion occurs that damages his legs in a twist of irony and leaves him buried under rubble. After this explosion, which may or may not have been caused by the mimic, M2 finds Edwin, and in the aftermath creates this audio log in Edwin's office. M2?
Too bad the new power test was a failure.
What?
Due to a minor detonation. There is damage to my office interior, as well as
I don't want.
Note to self, portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage.
Is the M2's trying to beam Edwin?
A Cleanovac attachment.
Help! M2! Respond! Emergency! Call for help!
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Oh Jesus, dude, that's heartbreaking.
Please! I can't move. I can't feel my legs.
Oh man.
You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
You are incredibly cruel and evil.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
Oh, can't right now, buddy. We can do something fun tomorrow.
Dude, this is what Edwin tells David in the books. This is
Ask your mom if
heartbreaking.
she's not busy.
Oh jeez. So now, M2 has taken over Edwin's role and creates new legs for himself, leaving Edwin to suffer under the rubble. Now, it's unknown if Edwin dies from this or is still alive, but I don't think we have enough evidence to say for sure without using the books. So I want to clear something up before we continue. M2 isn't a separate body, like I said earlier. Both M1 and M2 shared the same body, but M1's subconsciousness was transferred to the and became the Fiona machine, while the M2 got its consciousness put inside the mimic endoskeleton, where it would then remain, and the M2 mimic would be the one that we face off of in the game. Continuing with the second ending, Fiona tells us that we have the M2 schematics. We can give those to Edwin, and if he repairs M2, then everything can be better. So we leave an event behind us and go to Edwin's house to see if he is there, which he isn't. After we get into Edwin's office with the code, we upload the schematics and install this program called Cradle.exe and begin to escape the mimic and some other creatures as the entire place burns down. After escaping the fiery ruins of Edwin's costume manor, we begin to drive away as the mimic and the other creatures jump on our car, crash through our windshield, and crash the car. The mimic approaches us in the wreckage, steals our data diver, and once again leaves with it, heading off into the wilderness of Hurricane, Utah. presumably leaving Arnold for dead. So, ending 1 and ending 2, either of them could be speculated to be canon, since the Mimic gets the data diver both times, and Arnold is still basically left for dead by the Mimic. But what about the third ending? The one that is most likely not canon, but still gives us more insight into further lore of this game. In ending 3, if we get every single collectible in the game and beat the Moon.exe program, we get a 7th secret upgrade for our data diver, where we can access some of the doors in Edwin's manor that we couldn't get to before. And inside all of these rooms, we find audio cassette tapes which have different bedtime stories. And after getting all of them, we get access to a secret room that looks very similar to the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 bedroom. But as of right now, this is David's room. Inside is Little Mimic, who keeps going between Little Mimic and Big Mimic M2, who tries to kill us. But by using the different storybook recordings, he reverts into being David, and after a while, the Mimic becomes so confused, he glitches out, allowing us to insert our data diver and upload the M2 schematics, where David is basically restored, like Fiona said. After this, the Mimic grabs David's tiger plushie, mimicking David's behavior, and heads off to bed in the final ending of the game. Now, while this game does leave up some questions, such as how the Mimic ended up in security breach, does Arnold end up surviving, and which ending is canon, we unfortunately don't get those answers. However, we do get some answers which recontextualize the story, but not in a way that detracts from it, in my opinion. While I can understand some people being upset that Henry and William didn't make every single animatronic, they did end up making most of their creations. The only animatronics they didn't come up with themselves were Chica and Foxy, who were made by Fiona and Edwin. William and Henry still made Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, the Springlocks, Freddy, Bonnie, the toy animatronics, the puppet, and the Fun Times. The designs we saw in this game were only prototype designs, made from the request of William and Henry. They gave the concepts of what they wanted, Fiona drew them up, and then Edwin began to build the suits with their approval, before Henry and William would tell them, no, we don't want these, and then they would go on to design and make the unwithered designs for the main 4 animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Edwin, while being friends with these people, were still contracted by Fazbear Entertainment to make all these robots, and even then, it's not like they walked in after Edwin disappeared and stole them, because at that point in the story, Henry and William had already designed and come up with the concepts of the Unwithereds, supposedly. In fact, we can even see that Edwin got files from Henry called Fazbear Alt Designs, which were most likely the ugly designs that Edwin was told to make instead of whatever Fiona came up with. So, Edwin was just a contractor Henry and William hired to build their robots for them, because presumably this is when Fredbear Family Diner was in the height and peak of its business, so we can assume that they were so busy with what they already have that they really didn't have the time to do it themselves. It wasn't until Edwin disappeared that they either had to get their other engineers to make these animatronics, or they made them themselves. In fact, that's another thing. It's probably more likely that Henry and William didn't even make any of the robots, as they had other workers, engineers, and designers that probably did the work for them. Henry and William were the owners. They had to deal with the day-to-day business management of handling all like the paperwork and the budgets and everything. So they probably had a lot of other people doing the performances and building the animatronics. I would not be surprised if the only models Henry and William ever made were Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, and the puppet, along with the concept of the Springlocks. But that's just my take on this, and I would be completely fine with that. I mean, it's not like any of this stuff was confirmed anyway in the game up until now. Now, what is the secret? The one final thing I want to leave this video on is what was the Mimic's secret? Throughout the entire game, and even the title, it's implied that there's a secret in this game that no one could predict, but was never explicitly told to us. In my opinion, like most other people, I agree with the sentiment that the secret was there was two mimics, the M1 and M2 mimic. Now, while we knew there were more than one mimics from the books and all the way back in Security Breach, the M1 is the digital version of the mimic, which has an easier time mimicking personalities, while the M2 is the physical version of the mimic that can twist and change into anything and is this rage-filled robot that wants to lash out at anything it sees. This goes hand in hand with explaining Glitchtrap and the Mimic and explaining why they seem like two different things while being part of the same entity. This has been a theory for a few years now, but it was called Mimic Branch, where Glitchtrap was the digital manifestation of the Mimic 01 program, while the Mimic we see in Ruin was the physical manifestation of the Mimic 02 program. But this still leaves us with some questions, such as how Fiona would become Glitchtrap, or if the machine she's in becomes the MXES machine we see in Ruin, and this game doesn't really answer that. But hopefully, we get some answers in the next game, which is a sequel to Ruin. And with all that, thank you for listening. I hope I was able to clear up some stuff, and I'll see you all on the flip side.